And welcome to another episode of the Nashville Scoop. I'm Chris McKenna.
I'm Ashley.
And took a little break last week. It was the kids' spring break, which is a little bit different from the Northeast where we're from, different time of year. But so last week was spring break. We were busy bringing the kids around all week, so didn't get an episode in. But this week we decided to start chipping away at the highest rated tourist attractions. So we're going to try and start mixing those into these episodes as well. So this week we started out with the Hermitage. But before we get started, really quick, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And if you're just listening on the podcast, just make sure you follow us for future episodes and everything. So let's get into it. So the Hermitage, which is Andrew Jackson's home. Okay. So any of you that don't know who Andrew Jackson is, former president, lived in Nashville. I guess he was born in controversial either North Carolina or South Carolina, we heard while we were on the tour. But yeah, so a lot of things from yesterday, because that's when we did the tour. I guess basically start out from the beginning. The Hermitage is located, what I would say about 15 to 20 minutes east of Nashville. Because afterwards, after the tour, we did drive downtown. So I think it took us at that time.
It took us like 18, 19 minutes.
Yeah.
At that time.
So, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And as we learned on the tour, back in the day when it was horses and things like that, it was a 4-hour trip to Nashville. So that's kind of interesting. You don't really think about that very often, but... and we'll kind of get into what some other things, I guess, that has to do with the distance and what we learned and stuff like that later. But so starting from the beginning, we got to the Hermitage. Great drive up once you get down the road. I mean, he's on now 1,100 acres still is the Hermitage. So nice little long drive up the driveway to get to the tourist center. You have some different options when you do these tours. And you could do a self-guided tour. You could do sort of the VIP guided tour. And then they have a bunch of other options as well that kind of focus on different aspects of the Hermitage itself.
They have like a horse carriage one too.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yep, you can do that too, which would be kind of cool to do. But we picked the VIP guided tour. So that tour is done, I think it's twice a day. I think we did it at 10 a.m.
Yep.
It was also another one at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was $65. So it was actually really nice. It was a small group. I don't know how big the groups can be or like how big they typically are, maybe in the summertime, a little bit more tourist time. But our group was only, seven people?
Yeah,
so
it was 7.
It was perfect. The tour guide, I forget what his exact...
His name was Keith.
Keith, yes. But I forget what his title was there. Interpretation.
Director of Interpretation, I believe it was.
So Keith is... he said one of his jokes was that whenever he does like the school tours, all the kids ask him if he was around when Andrew Jackson was actually around. And you kind of laughed it off at first, but then as you got through the tour... Well, not even got through the tour. I would say at the very beginning of the tour, you're kind of like... All right, I kind of get why the kids ask him that. Great guy, and ended up being a very good tour, but he could definitely, he could get lost a little bit, I think. Slowed down a little bit in what he was talking about, but great information overall. And again, he was a very good tour guide for sure. So he definitely knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, he was very knowledgeable, you could tell. You can tell he's been doing it for a long time. I mean, he was probably in his 70s, maybe even the 80s, and maybe even 80s. And he was great, though.
Yeah, he was. He said that he came here, he went there for the first time when he was in 5th grade, I think. And I forget what he said about the tour guide then. But yeah, he's been coming there for a long, long time. So he knows it very, very well, you can tell. Any questions that anybody asked the entire time, he knew right away.
Yeah,
so he was great. The way that they start the tour is, so there is like a little visitor center where you go in and they've got like these displays. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to have a bunch of, I took a lot of pictures, a lot of video, things like that throughout. So you'll see a good mix of stuff that we actually did go through. But you start the tour out in this like little visitor center where it's just got like these really big posters and pictures and then some artifacts as well. And they kind of go through his entire life, right? So we're not going to get into a lot of specifics about Andrew Jackson and things like that. We're really just going to more try and focus on the tour. We'll throw a little bit of, some tidbits out there and things. But so the tour guide, Keith, he kind of takes you through his whole life, beginning birth all the way up until the presidency. And the portion of the visitor center that we went through mainly focused on birth up to military action.
Yes.
Okay. And then sort of once it got to like the presidential area, we went outside and we started heading to the Hermitage. But later on, after we were done, we came back in and we did go through the other part of the center, which did focus a little bit more on his presidency and years after and things like that. And they have a lot of really cool artifacts in there that we can kind of get into later as well. But so you did that, and then you go out to the grounds. You head out of the visitor center, you walk out. Beautiful day. It was perfect. It was cold.
It was chilly, but it was nice. At least it was sunny out.
But it was perfect for the tour because it was so nice and sunny and everything, and you got to like really appreciate the grounds.
The grounds. Right.
I mean, it's amazing.
It is
amazing. It really is. So, so you take the little walk over to the building that everybody calls the Hermitage, which we found out it is not the Hermitage. It's really the entire grounds are the Hermitage.
Right.
So,
because I know that was one of the fun facts he was talking about at the beginning, that it was more of I guess Jackson would call it like a rural retreat, I guess, outside of the city. And I guess they ended up changing the name to the Hermitage because that's exactly what that translates into, is the rural retreat. It just sounds a little bit more
fancy,
bougie,
I
guess.
Exactly. So it was really cool. So we got up to the building, and I guess one of the way that he made it sound as far as like our guided tour, the VIP tour, right? I think that one of the big things, now I'm not sure, because even me and you talking about this just earlier, we weren't really sure where we actually sat on the tour as far as this goes, but it sounded to me like when you're on the guided tour, you can take pictures inside of the building, whereas if you weren't part of that tour, then you maybe couldn't. But we know for sure that one of the perks of the tour is that you get to go out onto that balcony that's up on the second floor and looks out over the entire like entrance into it, which is amazing. So we did know that, but not sure about the picture thing. I don't know if you can take pictures if you're not on the guided tour or not. So again, not going to get into details about everything, just sort of keep to what the tour was about. But so he gives you like a little bit of an intro about the building and things like that. And then you get to walk inside, and it is like, what were some of the stats that he gave us?
They were saying that most people believe it is one of the most well-preserved presidential homes in the entire United States.
Yeah.
There's something like up to 80% of the artifacts are true to that time.
Not like true to the time, like as in a replica, theirs. Like it was his.
Yes,
in
like the home.
85%.
Yes, piano in there, bed, slippers.
Right. Yeah. So they had like full rooms, and the way that they preserve it is you're confined to the hallways, which is totally fine because like you still get an amazing view of all of the rooms. So all the rooms are open, and they have basically like special plexiglass that, everything's climate controlled inside of those rooms, but all those rooms are completely preserved and kept away from people. Right. So you can't get into the rooms, but you can see everything inside, and it's all of the stuff from the 1800s when he was there, which is amazing. So again, a bunch of pictures on YouTube. So you'll be able to see a bunch of what we saw. So you go through, and then they let you up on the balcony, and you get to take pictures out there and stuff. And we'll go through maybe a couple of cool points of the inside. What were like one of your favorite things?
One of the favorite things of me is, so I guess he really wasn't a well-off child.
Right.
He was orphaned at 14, which I thought was pretty sad.
Yeah.
So he sort of brought himself up, and he didn't have a lot of money. So everything he did, he sort of made himself on his own. So he was, very particular on where he spent his money, and he did
Even
really
in the presidency as he went through
when
too.
he had it, he didn't want to spend
Didn't
it.
like debt.
Yes, exactly. So his baseboards, they look as though they are marble, but they are not.
Right.
They are wood, and they're painted to look as though, which I was like, that's
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool.
Because it looked good too.
It did.
And then like on that same point, like with the exterior of the house, with the nice white front of the house, almost looks like the White House, the Greek columns and everything.
Yes.
So two funny parts about the exterior of the house is those Greek columns are not cement.
Stone, yeah.
They're stone. They're wood, and they're just shaped like they were stone columns. And the paint is actually, it's just paint. So they painted those wood columns with paint that had sand in them, so that it would have that stone texture to it, which I thought was fantastic because it actually does it looks authentic.
It does, right? You would never know it.
Yeah, unless and he went up and started tapping on the columns too, just to show you. But so I thought that was really funny. But yeah, very, very frugal,
Yes.
and I think he said that he was the last president to erase the entire debt of the United States. So he hated debt.
Right.
So yeah, some very, very cool facts.
Interesting.
That was definitely one of my favorite things too. It was constant throughout the tour, where it was like, oh, he did this to save money, he did this to save money, he did this to save money, and it was really funny, some of the things that he did. So so that part was good.
The wallpaper too. On the first floor. Yeah.
So again, like even in the common areas where you're allowed to walk, the wallpaper is the actual wallpaper that they had on the bottom floor. It was the exact from what they had then, but even up on the second floor, it wasn't authentic to the home, but it was authentic to the time period. It is actually older. The wallpaper that's upstairs that isn't authentic to the house is older than the wallpaper that is on the bottom floor too. So like everything in there is so well preserved, and it was amazing to walk through. It really was. So if anybody listening, if you love like history and like walking through museums and like all sorts of tours like this, and you haven't been to this one, 100% recommend going, because it was amazing. You definitely go back in time with this one.
Yes.
So that part of the tour was awesome. We go outside and we saw a couple other things and some other cool facts, and you can see like how different houses were back then as opposed to how they are now. They didn't even have a kitchen in the house, I guess.
There was one that was in the house, but it was in the basement.
Right.
And they were finding that with it being so hot down here, it really wasn't a good idea. So they ended up moving it.
Right.
And they made it storage, and then they put the kitchen at an adjacent
right outside
structure outside the house.
Yep. So cool facts like that. And then we walked around. They took us out back, and we saw some other buildings, like some old cabins. We saw the old cabin, we didn't actually go down to the one that he had first lived in. The first one that was bought, but that one was down there as well. But just getting to see like all the old buildings that were outside and everything, and how people lived back then, and just the facts that the tour guide gives you the entire time, they're just unreal, So and then how did we end up in the after we left the building?
So we went to Rachel's garden. That was the spot. I said it's about an acre.
Which was his wife.
Yes, that was his wife. He was very, very fond of his wife.
Yes.
And they have what's called Jackson's tomb, which is interesting.
Yep. So his tomb, where him and his wife are buried, is out there too.
Yes.
Yep. And then actually another smaller graveyard of family members, like his adopted. So they never had actual children. They had adopted children, maybe, or child.
I believe they did. Yeah.
So family members are out there, as well as the past, enslaved people.
Yes.
The one guy that they loved,
I believe his name was Alfred, if I'm
right. Yeah. So that was in itself a really cool story about how he was born there.
Yes.
Right. So he was born there and eventually became free and stayed there, continued to work at the house and everything, and then eventually became a tour guide. So, and that's actually one of the other cool things is that that they were telling us about how old this is as a museum. Basically, it was being used like as a tour, like a tourist attraction, while people were still living in it.
Right. I think they said they started the tours in 1889.
Right.
Which is
That's
amazing.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about.
Yeah, and so like to have this place be preserved for this long, and like it was crazy that like people are still living there, and they're like, hey, this place, this is special, you know.
I thought it was amazing that the enslaved man ended up staying. He ended up just paying for, I think he was paying rent on the building he was living in, and he was like, I'm gonna stay, which I thought was.
It was great. And then like the tour guide had said too is, wow, I would have loved to have like gotten a tour from him.
Right.
Like,
the information he would have had. Right.
How authentic all that information would be. Exactly. And you hear everything. So that would have been cool. Let's see. So what else? And then after that, that's when we went back in and we went back through the tourist center.
Yes.
Where all of those artifacts and things like that were. What were just a couple of like your highlights with the artifacts?
A couple of the cool ones. One of them was one of Rachel's veils that she had worn. And I think it was amazing, just the detail in it. I believe it said Jackson at the bottom. Then his mourning hat. So after Rachel had passed away, which was very close to when he became president, he had a mourning hat. So we got to see the actual hat. That
she actually passed away right before he became president. Yeah. So, yeah, and I forget how he said he might have worn that pretty much forever, like afterwards, or always, maybe not that specific hat, but like always had the ribbon around his hats in mourning. So, yeah, any other artifacts that you can think of?
And then the horse-drawn carriage that was restored. That was awesome.
The carriage was really cool to see. Yeah. And then like on the general side of things, like when he was in the wars and stuff, they had some like really cool artifacts as well. So they had some guns, weapons, swords. They had, trying to think, there was actually, they had an old British bayonet from the Battle of New Orleans that had gotten lost. I guess it like dropped and then a tree ended up growing around it. They recovered it way later, and the tree had actually so it had grown around the bayonet, and they had to remove it from the tree, and still portion of the tree is on the bayonet. So but yeah, just a ton of like really cool artifacts. The tour itself was informational, but still interesting. Like I mean, Keith could get drawn out a little bit when he was giving the tour, but like never lost interest.
No.
I mean, obviously he never lost interest, but neither did we. So, and it didn't seem as though anybody in the tour did. Everybody seemed to enjoy it a lot. So,
and it was definitely more guided towards his early years, and then more so his, when he was in the military, in the militia, became a general, because it seems like from what the tour guide had said, he thought that was the most important thing. Right. The presidency was nice, but he felt as though becoming a general was,
Exactly. Yeah. And on his tomb, there's nothing mentioned about being president, but he did have himself recognized as general. So, he always said that the presidency didn't mean as much, like it wasn't as high of an honor. Right. Yeah. So. I mean, honestly, I loved it. I mean, and I'm a big history guy anyway. I love all of that stuff, especially in that time period, is very interesting. So I loved it. I'm sure you did.
I did. Yeah. No, it's great. Like I said, as you get older, I think you just sort of enjoy history a lot more than when you did when you were maybe in high school or middle school. Right.
Yeah. I mean,
think you just appreciate it more.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I didn't like anything that had to do with history probably until I'd say my 30s, right? But
and the grounds are beautiful. I mean, we could have spent a lot more time. It was just, we were sort of on a time crunch, so we couldn't spend a ton of time. So there were a few things that we missed out on, but overall, the tour was great.
And again, the grounds are amazing. It really is. And like there are some cool things that are left even on the grounds themselves that he pointed out on the tour and things like that too, that remain from that time period,
Right.
which is really cool. So, but yeah, I mean, if history is your thing, even if it's not, you know, I mean, like if you just enjoy like seeing the scenery and everything outside of Nashville, you want like something a little bit, you know, low key to do as opposed to going down to Broadway
Right.
if you're here to visit and things like that. I know that a couple of people in the group even said they were just here to see that. And
Right.
that was it. Like they had driven probably like, I think from the two spots that they had mentioned, one was probably like 4 hours and one was probably like around 4 to 5 hours. And they came here just to see that.
Right.
So definitely worth seeing. Check it out. I recommend the guided tour, definitely,
I do
because I feel like you just get more information.
I do
you
too.
know, I mean, you can learn things from all the pictures
And reading everything that they have, yes.
yeah, but to hear somebody actually point out the key parts and like, you know, things like that, I think that it's a lot better. You get a lot more information. And it's definitely worth it. So
And they do have an audio tour too. I did see that because there was some signage at some of the rooms and everything in the mansion that had some signage for the audio tour. But
yep. All right, so I recommend it. You?
I do too, definitely.
Great. Well, I know it was a little bit of a different episode, you know, not like your typical bar, restaurant, like family type activity. Again, we're going to try and mix in some more of these sort of tourist attractions. We have a list of like 30 different tourist attractions, and we're going to start mixing those in as well because, I mean, whether you're coming here to visit or even if you moved here recently, you know, I mean, and maybe you've lived here for a long time and you've never seen some of these things because like we were talking too, like coming from Boston, like obviously I had lived there almost my entire life and I don't think I've ever done a historical tour in Boston.
Right.
Now,
And
Salem I have, like
right.
doing the whole Salem witch trial thing. I definitely did that a couple of times, but I've never been to any of the historical stuff in Boston, which is crazy to think
Because
about.
there's so much history there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Dating
So,
way back.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
so I mean, even if you're from here and you haven't been, I definitely recommend doing it and, you know, taking the time out. So anything
agree.
else?
No, I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening to that one, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a good one.
Listen on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Watch all of our episodes on YouTube at The Nashville Scoop. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Nashville Scoop Podcast or TikTok at The Nashville Scoop Podcast. If you have any interest in real estate in Nashville, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok at The Nashville Realtor.